Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Jirka, for the invite. Thank you, Martin, for hosting. It's been a really great day so far. And yeah, coming all the way from Australia, having a big contingent here. I hope you're not tired of us just yet. Yeah, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that Monash is situated on the Wurundjeri Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations in Australia. That's where we work. And yeah, I looked it up, and Stanford is situated on the Wawekma and Ohlone people's land. And we make this acknowledgement in Australia really to think about the context of the land where we work. And that's a really important piece of the puzzle, I think, when we think about industrialized construction and the necessary transformations moving forward. It's not just about history, but ways of thinking about being into the future. As Daniel mentioned, I lead a research group at Monash University called the Future Building Initiative. We're focused on industrialized building and take a very specific design view of the problem. And I also act as a research program leader for Building 4.0, contributing Monash University's contributions into Australia's largest built environment research initiative. As such, I'm representing the work of a team of about 10 senior researchers and 8 PhD candidates. We're a diverse crew with backgrounds in architecture, engineering, construction management, and yeah, different experiences from academic and industry perspectives. But today, I've titled my talk, The Standard of Architecture. There have been a number of conversations so far today talking about standards, products. We had some questions earlier and yesterday about the role of architects. I'm a registered architect. I came into a research career wanting to improve the profession, wanting to look for better ways of designing. And I think that there's a number of pathways that we can take to get there. And as such, I'd like to talk through really what we mean by standards, just very lightly, dip into some of the history of industrialization, an architect's view of the problem, and then think about ways that we can look for change, and how perhaps design can act as an enabler of change. And then present one approach, which is the research work, the contributions that we are taking from that design research perspective. So firstly, what do we mean by standards? Well, they are a form of measurement, and this feeds into the earlier discussions about coordination. A standard is an exemplar of something, the quality. So we can use terms like design quality, design value, but we can also think about design standard. But also it can act as a rallying point, something that we can look to, the light on the hill. And more broadly, industrial standardization can be an enabler of innovation, and it can promote interoperability, compatibility, but in many ways that comes back to the people who activate the standards and the efforts towards standardization. I don't think we should miss that on the journey, rather than thinking of them necessarily as a technical tool. There are, of course, challenges that others have touched on, but these are also enablers. I think we can often get fixated on the problem rather than seeing the opportunity. But these are global and local. As we've learned this week, many of the pressures here in California are replicated in various parts of Australia. And I think also when we've traveled to Europe, we've seen commonality. Of course, there are issues that are specific to construction. Others have defined these. Koskela and Vreehoff's 3 peculiarities to do with the site, stakeholders, and the product. And often we take a technical view of standards in the industry that really focus on coordinating the product, interfacing with site, but perhaps we miss the opportunity to work together in terms of coordinating people. And therefore, perhaps there's a softer view of standards that's required, and perhaps there's a role for design. Of course, there's a history of designers in the built environment, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that. We are looking for a new way of working, socially, culturally, that is more productive. But I think when we look towards the future, that there's a real opportunity to bridge the gap between research and market, and standards can play a role there, not just in terms of industry implementation. But of course, when we think about design in the built environment, there's a life cycle to contend with. And perhaps some of the technical view of standards really starts in the middle of the problem and looks to build out. If we can solve the interface of detailed design with assembly and production, then perhaps we've solved the problem. But industrialization promises a new way of working, a broader way. And to my view, that really opens up many opportunities across this value chain, from early design ideation activities that contribute and help project feasibility, help projects get up, help them get financed, right the way through to occupancy and end of life, as others have touched on today. But this certainly is not a new problem. And I dug out this quote. I'm sure others have presented this at various times. But when we think about the problems today, the housing problems, we see industrialization as an unstoppable force. It is necessity. But this is a quote from 98 years ago by architect Walter Gropius. And so this really touches then upon how architects have engaged with industrialization and change. And as I said, it's a varied history. It is a long one. If we go back to the late 19th century, there was a view that in the year 2000s, architects would be sitting on site, pushing buttons, seeing buildings get built. And then during the 20th century, of course, architects became interested in modes of production, mass manufacture, while others dug into the detail of building and looked at modular building systems down to the level of the concrete block, as Frank Lloyd Wright's Usonian homes did to a greater or lesser degree. And these modular building systems held a promise that perhaps there was a more efficient way of building. And of course, there was a disruption of the Second World War, but that led to the creation of industrial infrastructure, and again, a promise of a new way of building that could leverage that investment, that infrastructure that had been put in place in response to the war effort. But as we've seen, these initiatives obviously did not have the impact that were promised, but certainly created a number of ideas. And again, stopping at the midway point of the 20th century, I found this article from Fortune magazine, that really reading it, you could replace the date from 1947 and put in 2024, and we might find ourselves saying exactly the same things, that construction has a low level of industrialization, and there's an immense opportunity for investment. There's a real opportunity for growth. And architects, certainly during this middle point of the 20th century, were really invested in a story about making housing better for the many people, the promise that Jirka touched on yesterday with Bukluk's mandate. We saw these homes as forms of suburban housing ideals, but that were effectively designed with an efficient intent, but also innovative ways of building and providing solutions for the greatest number of people for the least use of material, least use of labor. But of course, as we moved through the 20th century, the number of industrialization efforts that were perhaps not quite as successful as were planned. And again, architects perhaps bore the brunt of many of the criticisms of these mass housing solutions, despite responding to a time of crisis of housing shortage, the need to rehome people after the Second World War. And these are well documented and spoken by others as a failure of industrialization in many ways, and the legacy of that modernist period. And so later in the 20th century, architects drifted from that core intent of looking to industrialization as a means of delivering housing for many people, and really focused on the building systems, the logics, the ways of seeing design as, or systems building as a tool of conceptual investigation rather than industrial implementation. So really this is a story of a long pursuit of change, and it certainly doesn't stop in the 1980s or rather the 1990s, because since then there have been a number of reviews that tell us the same problem again and again, but perhaps architects have been less invested in these reviews, perhaps having been scared off by the mid-20th century failures. And I wasn't going to show this graph because I think it's been shown a number of times, but I was reflecting on my own journey looking into this problem, which began 10 years ago with my PhD, and this article was from 2014, and I wanted to include this just to provide a bit of a prompt, which is, are we any further down the journey towards increased productivity 10 years later? I did a bit of a Google News review and just went through year on year the number of stories, just taking a snapshot across the last 10 years, and was thinking to myself we could almost remove the date from these slides, and this would prompt us to think that yes, change is difficult, but that, and this is 2023, just last year, but these provide a patchwork of issues and of lines of investigation and opportunities that again, are we constantly spinning our wheels, or are we looking to make consistent and sustained progress towards improving the image from that 2014 slide of improving productivity? And of course, over the last 20 years, there have been a number of failures. Others, again, have touched upon these. And I don't want to dwell on them and be a naysayer or a doom monger. But others have also asked questions about the perils of growth. And most recently, these failures in the UK, of course, have prompted the parliamentary inquiry into MMC. And we've done some work just looking at the last 5 years as a snapshot. And as a minimum, we calculated that there was between 3.6 and 4 billion US dollars written off in these failures. And of course, a substantial chunk of that is Katerra. However, it's not without regards to the number of other very similar efforts that have failed. So looking for a pathway forwards, what do we see? What do we think that is and could be? Well, as a research group, we see that opportunity being design as a way to navigate the puzzle. And when I say design, I started the talk by talking about architecture. I do mean both sides of the church, or perhaps all three participants on that slide, the architect, the engineer, and the builder, because each of those participants does design work, and that's not to disregard design work that may be done by a developer or later stage trades. However, if we break it down into a soft and a hard side of design, and then the technical realization through building work, we can see design occurring across a spectrum. And of course, design, there's a number of definitions out there. I'm not going to try and provide a concrete definition, but certainly there's a problem, there's a solution, there's analysis, evaluation, but also synthesis, and so I really want to dwell on that. But we also are looking for products which are desirable, viable, and feasible. But as a process, it's one that is creative, it's collaborative, it's iterative, but fundamentally it's human-centered, and I think that we really must keep those aspects of process and outcome in mind as we work across the value chain. And to my mind, there's a power in front-end decisions. We just saw the graph talking about the cost of early good design decision-making, having the most impact environmentally and in regards to cost, but I think also in terms of the human outcome, that if we can design early, design with an intent, and we think that can be done through standards, and having a good design standard as well. And that really helps us think about design and architecture as something that occurs beyond projects. And this is something that I think architects perhaps have not been good at historically, because it also implies moving between domains with fluidity, letting go of ego, and looking for, again, that collaborative collaborative process that leads to human-centered outcomes. Of course, there are solutions. We've heard about product platforms and digital platforms as enablers of collaboration and enablers of good design outcomes. And we also see technical tools emerging from manufacturing that perhaps aren't tuned to the built environment, and that are often positioning design perhaps as subjugated to the requirements of manufacturing and assembly. But yeah, we've done some work to look at what is required to take DFMA into the built environment, and suggesting that an holistic view of design can provide a standard that works across the value chain. And this holistic view implies the management of trade-offs, and I think that's an activity that design is, or the soft side of design is very good at doing. And we can also use it as an analytical tool to look back at some of these problems of the past, and review some of the progress that we're making, and perhaps use it as a tool of analysis when we think about, are we making progress towards improving productivity more generally? So I'll close with a bit of a snapshot of the work that we've done in the Australian context. I do say this is just one approach. I'm not saying it's the approach. But our research it runs through three streams. We look into products and processes, the parts of the building, the systems, and how we get them built. We also look into the environment and resources that industrialization holds promise and can improve. And then the digital and computational design tools that are emerging and that promise to improve the quality of design outcomes. So I'm going to step through a range of projects that are being conducted within my research group, but with a number of our industry collaborators, some of whom are here today. And we look at issues of product selection, so looking for design support mechanisms to assess products that are in the market, and provide a lens by which we can juggle the multiple performance requirements when we think of fire, acoustic, structural, the production requirements in this project, looking into long-span, low-carbon flooring systems, such that we can make better decisions as designers much earlier in the piece. And this provides a bit of a framework, a fairly simplistic framework that we would like to take forward and develop. Again, we looked, like others have spoken about today, looking into modular production systems in this product and process stream, trying to unpack and demystify volumetric construction. So looking at bathroom pods and also the business model adaptations that are required of companies manufacturing these. We've looked into projects within the Australian context, the information flows, design information flows that are required in order to implement DFMA modes of working, and also implementing more lean, looking at these processes in order to strip out procedural waste when we're implementing projects. But we've also worked with partners to try and create a strategic framework, a decision-making framework that can help guide design decision-making across the value chain in order to industrialize project decision-making capability from start to finish across the value chain. And then we've also worked to benchmark material waste. So we do see industrialization holding great promise here. This project working with an off-site construction company where we demonstrated through the analysis of 40 townhouses that off-site production reduced material intensiveness by 18% and created a 40% material reduction, waste reduction. And then as we push towards implementing digital platforms, there is an increase in power consumption, but also a decrease in design intensiveness. And so we've worked with a partner considering their two platforms to free up human capital through design automation, which offsets in many ways the computational increase of carbon. And overall, this project demonstrated that I think there was about 1,700 trips to the moon that were removed from the CO2 chain potentially. And then finally, looking into our digital and computation stream, we look to understand and define what design quality is in the context of design digitalization. So looking into design systems, measures of quality, in this case in multi-residential building, such that we're able to benchmark understand the design criteria, encode that, to then create artificial intelligence, machine learning design tools that leverage language prompts to then automatically create renderings. And so we see this holding great promise then moving into later phase design actions. So I want to leave with a positive vision what the standard of design or architecture is and could be. I think that we, as a community of designers working across all sectors of the value chain, I think we should be using design to develop new processes, new approaches that are founded in a systems basis and that are market focused. So, because if we don't build anything at the end of the day, we can't measure success. I think we need to equip professional domains, those in the room today, but also out in the wider industry with knowledge and the capability to change. And part of that is also about empowering. So empowering the supply chain, I think that's a critical piece that we often overlook. Yes, there's really exciting companies, really exciting research that's occurring, but the construction is a wide industry, a huge employer, a massive part of any country's GDP. And the change that we're looking to implement is urgent at the end of the day when we think about the problem of carbon affordability and housing responsiveness. So I will finish there. Thank you.